I never thought I'd be the kind of person someone would come to with questions like that. I mean, I'm just a graphic designer who keeps to himself, waters his plants too often, and has a slightly embarrassing collection of vintage movie posters. But there I was, standing in my doorway at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, looking at my neighbor Reed with his hair all disheveled and this desperate, confused look in his eyes, asking me how I knew I was gay. Reed had moved in across the hall about 8 months earlier. I still remember that first day, watching him carry boxes up the stairs, his t-shirt riding up slightly, as he lifted a particularly heavy one. He had this easy smile, the kind that made you want to smile back even if you were having a terrible day. We'd done that neighbor thing where you're friendly, but not friends, you know. Quick hellos in the hallway, small talk about the building's terrible water pressure, borrowing sugar once when he was baking something at 2 in the morning. He was straight, or at least I'd assumed he was straight. He'd mentioned an ex-girlfriend once, talked about women he found attractive. I'd filed him away in that mental category of beautiful things I could look at but never touch, like art in a museum. It was safer that way. I'd learned a long time ago not to read into things, not to hope for something that wasn't there. But now here he was, standing in my doorway, in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, looking at me like I held the answer to some question that had been eating him alive. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and I could see him clenching and unclenching his jaw. This nervous habit I'd noticed he had whenever he was stressed about something. I stepped aside and let him in. I didn't even think about it. Something about the way he looked told me this wasn't a conversation for the hallway, where Mrs. Chen from 4B might shuffle past on her way to the trash chute. He walked into my apartment and just stood there, in the middle of my living room, looking around like he'd never seen it before, even though he'd been over a handful of times. His eyes landed on the photo of me and my college friends at Pride, the one where we're all covered in glitter and grinning like idiots, and I watched something flicker across his face. "Do you want some tea?" I asked, because I didn't know what else to say. My mum always made tea when things got heavy, like hot water, and leaves could somehow make difficult conversations easier. He nodded, and I went to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands. I could feel him watching me as I filled the kettle, grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet. The silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable exactly, but loaded with something unspoken. "I can't stop thinking about him," Reed said suddenly, his voice rough. His words hit me like a physical thing, and I almost dropped the mug I was holding. I turned to look at him, and he was staring down at his hands, his shoulders hunched forward like he was trying to make himself smaller. I set the mugs down carefully and leaned against the counter, giving him space to continue. The kettle started its low rumble, filling the quiet. "There's this guy at work," Reed continued. "His name's Oliver. He's in accounting, and I've known him for like 2 years, and I never thought anything about it. He's just Oliver, you know. But then last month we got assigned to this project together, and we've been spending all this time in conference rooms and working late, and I can't stop thinking about him. The way he laughs at stupid things. The way he pushes his glasses up when he's concentrating. The way he smells like coffee and something else I can't quite place. And last week, our hands touched when we were both reaching for the same document. And I felt it everywhere, like my entire body just lit up. And I haven't been able to sleep right since." He looked up at me then, and I could see the fear in his eyes, but also something else. Something like relief at finally saying it out loud. The kettle clicked off, and I poured water over the tea bags, watching the colour slowly bleed into the clear water. I'd been where Reed was, though it felt like a lifetime ago. I remembered the confusion, the fear, the way it felt like the ground was shifting under my feet. I brought the mugs over and sat down on the couch, gesturing for him to join me. He sat on the other end, wrapping his hands around the mug like he needed something to anchor him. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "Like, how did you know for sure?" I took a sip of my tea, buying myself a moment to think. "It's different for everyone," I said. "For me, I think I always knew, on some level, but I spent a long time trying to convince myself otherwise. I dated girls in high school because that's what you did. I told myself I just hadn't met the right one yet. But there was always this disconnect, you know? Like I was playing a role instead of living my life." Reed nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on his tea. "The moment I really knew, though," I continued, "was during my sophomore year of college. There was this guy in my art history class, Cameron. We became friends, started studying together, and one night we were in the library really late, and he fell asleep on my shoulder. And I just sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, because I'd never felt anything so right in my entire life. That's when I couldn't lie to myself anymore." "What did you do?" Reed asked. I panicked, I admitted with a small laugh. I avoided him for like 2 weeks. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase or confusion or whatever excuse I could come up with. But eventually I had to accept it. This was who I was. And once I did, once I stopped fighting it, everything got easier. Not easy, but easier. Reed was quiet for a long time, just holding his mug and staring at nothing. "I'm 31 years old, he finally said. "How did I not know this about myself? How did I date women for years and not realize?" "Sexuality is complicated," I said. "It's not always black and white. Some people know from the time they're kids. Some people don't figure it out until they're much older. There's no right timeline. And maybe you are attracted to women. Maybe you're bisexual or pansexual. Or maybe you've been so conditioned to follow a certain script that you never questioned it until now." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "I'm scared," he whispered. "What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin my friendship with Oliver over some stupid confusion? What if I'm right, and everything changes and everyone looks at me differently?" I set my mug down and shifted closer to him on the couch. "Reed," I said gently, "you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to label yourself or come out or do anything you're not ready for. Just let yourself feel what you're feeling. Stop fighting it. Stop analyzing it. Just feel it." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he wiped it away quickly, almost angrily. "Does it get easier?" he asked. "The not knowing?" "It gets different," I said. "Eventually, you reach a point where you trust yourself enough to explore these feelings without so much fear. But yeah, it can get easier. Especially if you let people in. Especially if you stop trying to carry it all alone." He nodded, and we sat there in silence for a while, drinking our tea. I could see his mind working, processing everything. Finally, he looked at me and said, "Thank you for not making this weird, for just listening." "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. He left about an hour later, after we'd talked more about his feelings for Oliver, about what it meant, about what he might want to do next. I told him to take his time, to be gentle with himself. As I closed the door behind him, I felt this strange mix of emotions. I was honored that he'd trusted me enough to come to me, but I was also worried for him. Coming to terms with your sexuality when you've spent your whole life assuming you were straight isn't easy. It requires unraveling so many assumptions about yourself, about your future, about who you thought you were. Over the next few weeks, I saw Reed in the hallway a few times. and each time he'd give me this small, grateful smile. We didn't talk about it again. Not right away. I figured he needed space to process everything. Then one Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Reed standing there with 2 coffees and a nervous energy radiating off him. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let him in. We sat down, and he handed me one of the coffees. "I told him," Reed said without preamble. "I told Oliver how I feel." My heart jumped into my throat. "How did it go?" Reed's face broke into this incredulous smile, like he still couldn't quite believe it. He said he's been feeling the same way. For months, apparently. He thought I was straight, so he never said anything. I felt this surge of joy for him, and I couldn't help but grin. "Reed, that's amazing." "We went on a date last night," he continued, and his whole face was glowing now. "We got dinner at this little Italian place, and we talked for hours, and it was so easy, you know? It didn't feel scary or wrong or confusing. It just felt right. And at the end of the night, he kissed me. And I swear to God, I'd never been kissed like that in my entire life. Like every cell in my body was saying yes, this, finally. "I'm so happy for you," I said. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. "I wouldn't have had the courage to tell him if it wasn't for you," Reed said, his voice getting serious. "That night when I came over, I was spiraling so hard. I thought I was losing my mind. But you made me feel like it was okay to feel what I was feeling. Like I wasn't broken or confused or wrong. So thank you, Adrian. Really." Hearing him say my name like that, with so much genuine gratitude, made my chest feel tight. "You did the hard part," I said. "You were brave enough to be honest with yourself and with him. That takes real courage." We talked for a while longer, and he told me more about Oliver, about their date, about how they were taking things slow, but how excited he was. I loved seeing him like this, so animated and alive. It was like watching someone step out of a shadow into sunlight. After Reed left, I sat on my couch for a long time, thinking about the strange way life works. How a simple question asked in a moment of desperation can lead to something beautiful. How vulnerability can create connection. How sometimes the scariest thing we can do is admit the truth about who we are and what we want. I thought about my own journey, about how long it took me to accept myself, about the people who'd helped me along the way. I thought about Cameron from art history, who I'd eventually worked up the courage to tell about my feelings, only to discover he was straight, but incredibly kind about it. How that rejection, while painful, had taught me that honesty was always better than silence, even when the outcome wasn't what you hoped for. Over the following months, I watched Reed transform. He introduced me to Oliver, who was exactly as wonderful as Reed had described. They were good together, easy in a way that made you believe in the possibility of finding your person. Reed came out to his family, which went better than he'd feared, but not as smoothly as he'd hoped. His mom needed time to adjust, but his sister was immediately supportive. He started going to a support group for people who'd come out later in life, and he found community there. People who understood the unique challenges of rewriting your story in your 30s. And somewhere along the way, Reed and I became real friends. Not just neighbors who were friendly, but actual friends who got dinner together, who texted each other stupid memes, who showed up when the other person needed support. Oliver became part of that friendship too, and sometimes the 3 of us would have movie nights in one of our apartments, sprawled on couches with too much popcorn and wine. One evening, about 6 months after that first late-night conversation, Reed and I were sitting on my balcony watching the sunset. Oliver was working late, and Reed had stopped by just to hang out. We were drinking beer and talking about nothing in particular when Reed said, "I never thanked you properly." I looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For that night," he said. "For opening your door when I showed up looking like a mess. For not judging me. For helping me see that what I was feeling wasn't something to be afraid of." I waved him off. "You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe," he said. "But it would have taken a lot longer. And I might have missed out on the best thing that's ever happened to me because I was too scared to face the truth." We sat there in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Reed said something that caught me off guard. "You know, you helped me find Oliver, but you're still alone. Why is that?" I took a sip of my beer, considering the question. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess I got comfortable being by myself. It's easier, in some ways. No risk of getting hurt." Reed looked at me with this knowing expression. "That's bullshit, and you know it." I laughed, despite myself. "Okay, maybe it is." "When's the last time you put yourself out there?" Reed asked. "When's the last time you let yourself be vulnerable with someone?" I thought about it and realized I couldn't remember. After a few bad relationships in my 20s, I'd sort of retreated into myself. I'd focused on my work, my friends, my hobbies. I'd told myself I was happy alone, and in many ways I was. But Reed was right. I'd also built walls to protect myself, and those walls were keeping out the possibility of something real. "You should try," Reed said gently. "You deserve the kind of happiness you helped me find." His words stayed with me long after he left. I found myself thinking about them at random moments, while I was working, while I was cooking dinner, while I was lying in bed at night. Was I really happy? Or was I just safe? And was there a difference? I decided to try. I updated my dating profile, which I hadn't touched in over a year. I started saying yes to setups from well-meaning friends. I went on dates that ranged from awkward to pleasant to occasionally promising. It was uncomfortable at first, putting myself out there after so long, but it also felt good to be open to possibility again. And then I met Kai. He was a teacher at the elementary school down the street, and we literally ran into each other at the coffee shop we both frequented. He spilled his latte all over my shirt, and he was so apologetic and flustered that I couldn't help but find it endearing. He insisted on buying me a new coffee and paying for my dry cleaning, and we ended up talking for 2 hours, long after our drinks had gone cold. There was something about Kai that made me feel at ease. He had this gentle way of listening, really listening, that made you want to tell him everything. He was funny without trying too hard, passionate about his work with kids, and had this infectious optimism that balanced out my tendency towards cynicism. We started seeing each other regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into long walks through the city, which turned into spending entire weekends together. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself fall without constantly analyzing whether it was safe to do so. One night, about 2 months into dating Kai, the 4 of us went out to dinner together. Me and Kai, Reed and Oliver. It was one of those perfect evenings where the conversation flowed easily and the laughter came naturally. At one point, Kai reached over and took my hand under the table. Just a simple gesture, but it made me feel so connected to him, to the moment, to the life I was building. After dinner, as Kai and I were walking home, he said, "I really like your friends." Reed told me how you two became close. I smiled, remembering that late night when Reed had shown up at my door. "Yeah, he's pretty great." "He also told me that you helped him figure out his feelings for Oliver," Kai continued. "That you gave him the courage to be honest about who he was." I shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. I just listened. He did all the hard work. Kai stopped walking and turned to face me. "Adrian," he said, and there was something serious in his voice. "I want you to know that I see you. I see how kind you are, how you show up for people, how you create space for others to be themselves. And I want you to know that you can be yourself with me too. All of yourself. The parts you think are too much, and the parts you think aren't enough. I want all of it." I felt my throat get tight, and I realized I had tears in my eyes. I'd spent so much of my life being the person others came to, the one who held space and offered support, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone want to do that for me. "I'm falling in love with you," I said, the words coming out before I could second guess them. "Is that okay?" Kai smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "It's more than okay," he said, "because I'm already there." He kissed me then, right there on the sidewalk, with people walking past us, and I felt something inside me relax. Some part of me I hadn't even realized was still tense. This was what Reed had been talking about when he described kissing Oliver. This feeling of rightness, of coming home. As we walked back to my apartment, hand in hand, I thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How one late-night conversation could set off a chain of events that led to this moment. How helping someone else find their truth had somehow helped me find my own. Reed texted me later that night. "Just wanted to say I'm really happy for you. You and Kai are great together." I smiled as I typed back. "Thanks for pushing me to put myself out there. You were right." His response came quickly. "We helped each other. That's what friends do." And he was right. We had helped each other. Reed had reminded me that it was okay to be vulnerable, to take risks, to open my heart even when it was scary. And apparently, I'd helped him see that his feelings were valid, that he deserved to pursue what made him happy. That night, lying in bed with Kai asleep beside me, I felt grateful for all of it, for Reed's courage in knocking on my door that night, for my own willingness to open it, for the messy, complicated, beautiful journey of figuring out who we are and what we want, for the people who show up for us when we need them most, and for the possibility that exists when we're brave enough to be honest about our hearts. I never thought I'd be the kind of person someone would come to with questions about love and identity. But I'm glad Reed did. Because in helping him find his way, I somehow found mine too. And isn't that how it works? We stumble through this life, uncertain and afraid, until someone reaches out a hand. And sometimes in pulling them up, we discover we're standing taller too.